Good morning and welcome to live edition of Q&A for Coffee and the Word. You know, I'm starting to get a lot of questions trying to figure out which ones I'm going to answer first, but I told you last week that I was going to do another one on prayer today, and I really feel like this one's an important one. If you look at one of the most popular Psalms, or one of the most popular verses that people will tweet out, that people will put on their Facebook page, that people will talk about a lot, it's Psalms 37 and verse 4, which says, "Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." And what a lot of people take that text to mean is that, you know, if you just love God, He'll give you what you want. If you just love God, He'll do what you want. If you just love God, then you can have the things of this life that you really, 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 really want. In fact, Jesus says something similar. Jesus says that ask anything in my name and it will be given to you. And so you take delight in the Lord and He will give you the desires of your heart. And then Jesus says, if you ask anything in my name, it will be given to you. And I want to talk about this idea that God will give us whatever we ask for. And I think that's a real dangerous, I think it's really dangerous to even hope that, let alone believe that that's accurate. And I think the best way to answer this may be in the garden. You see, Jesus went to the garden, and if you watch Him, just before He goes into the most trying time of His life, just before He endures the most awful thing in His life, He says to His disciples, He says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." Now, none of us would disagree that Jesus took delight in the Lord. None of us would disagree that when Jesus prayed, that God was listening. And so when He goes to the garden, He prays 3 times the same prayer. "Father, if at all possible, let this cup pass from me." But listen to this next phrase, because this next phrase is extremely important. It is proof, actually, that Jesus takes delight in the Lord. "Yet not my will, but your will be done." God, if at all possible, Father, if at all possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not my will, but your will be done. And so 3 times He prays that same prayer. What is He praying for? He's praying that He doesn't have to go through what He's about to have to go through, that He knows He's about to have to go through. He's praying that he can be relieved of this overwhelming sorrow that He experiences. And it wasn't God's will. God had a plan for what He wanted to use Jesus for and to do. And so what we find Jesus doing at the end of His prayer in the garden is we find Him standing up with a new resolve. We find Him having the strength to endure what He's about to go through. If God gave us everything we ask for, we would destroy ourselves. In fact, there's a story in the Old Testament about the people of Israel kept coming to Samuel and they say, "We want a king." And God tells them, you don't want a king. We want a king. We want to be like all the other nations. We want a king. God says, you don't want a king. I am your king. No. The other nations have a king. We want a king. And God says, fine. You can have a king. In fact, there's one passage that, and I think I shared that last week with the persistent prayer. Like it's a real good chance that if you keep praying for the same thing over and over again, you just might get it, and you may not want what you're getting. And so Jesus in the garden prays that God would allow him to avoid the most excruciating thing ever. And God says no. So then what's the point of praying? And I think maybe that's where we need to focus our attention. What's the point of me spending time in prayer if God's just going to do what God wants to do? If it's all about God's desires and all about what God says, and I think there's a couple of ways to answer that question, but I want you to understand that God still wants you to bring all of your cares before Him. God wanted Jesus to come and pray that prayer, right? God wanted him to come and lay his heart bare before him, just like we as parents want our children to be able to come to us and express their desires. We may have to tell them no because we realize that some of the things they're asking for are more destructive to them than positive to them. Or we may have to tell them no because it doesn't fit in what we're trying to accomplish as a family. No is not always a rejection. Sometimes no is the words we need to hear to be able to endure what's coming before. And so we have to be careful in understanding what our prayer life is like, or what our prayer life is about. Your prayer life is not about getting things from God. It's about getting God. Your prayer life should be a relational experience in which you, as Paul says in Philippians chapter 4, cast all your cares upon him. Like it's got to be, or make your petitions known. That's the verse. It's got to be about us approaching the throne of grace with boldness, so that we can have a relationship with God, so that our desires become more in line with what God is wanting to do. You see, our first and most prevalent prayer should be, I want what you want because I believe you want what's best. I want what you want because I believe what you want is best. And we've been talking about stinking thinking, and this is a really good area to go. And so I want to end this in Romans chapter 12. And in Romans chapter 12, there's this really interesting concept that is extremely important to understanding this prayer concept. It says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. God's got things figured out you and I can't see. And it's important for us to surrender ourselves to that reality. It's important for us to use our prayer life to become more and more confident in what God is doing. And so what do I pray for? Well, if you'll notice in Jesus' model prayer, the first thing he teaches us is to pray relationally. Father. Father. Not my will, your will be done. Notice that in that prayer. Not my will. It's all about developing a trust relationship with God, knowing that his plans are to prosper you and not to harm you. His plans are to give you hope and a future. That's what Jeremiah 29:11, right? Is, I know the plans I have for you. He's got a plan for you. And sometimes your prayers are in conflict with that plan. So don't think a prayer that God does not respond in the affirmative to is a God's rejection. There's a song Garth Brooks sings called Unanswered Prayers. And when I was younger, of course, I sang that song all the time. And my wife would say, I don't really like that song. And I was like, why? What's wrong with it? She's like, I don't believe God doesn't answer prayers. And I do believe that God hears your cry. He hears your plea. But sometimes what he gives you is comfort in your time of distress, not relief. Because sometimes we have to go through the very thing that's before us. So when you pray, make sure that your prayer is that his good and perfect will be done. Let his will be done and not our own. There's one last verse I want to give you, and it's found over in James, and it says, the reason you don't get what you want a lot of times is because your prayer is you are praying to spend it on your own desires. That's not delighting in the Lord. That's delighting in yourself. Hope this helps. I've got a lot of questions you guys have been asking me, but this is a 10-minute video and I'm trying to keep it at 7 minutes. So we'll do another one next week. God bless you. And this has been another edition of Coffee and the Word.